I'm gonna wait for that prompt. There it is. So welcome everyone to our Policy Power Hour. My name is Dr. Erin Feitstinger. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the policy director here at the Women's Fund. Now, as usual, we have a lot of information to cover, so let's get right into it. Just a overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're definitely going to do a Legislature 101, a brief overview for those who are new to the legislature looking to get engaged, as well as a great refresh for folks, just as a reminder of what we're heading into. We're also going to talk about what, as we're talking through that, what we're going to expect in the 2025 legislative session. And we're going to talk about how you can advocate. Okay. The Legislature 101. When I was going through the participants, I recognize a lot of you from various trainings and past power hours. So I know that a lot of us already know a lot of this information, but it's incredibly important that we do an overview of how the legislature works, because this information is going to help us feel more confident in navigating what can otherwise feel really chaotic and unfamiliar. So hopefully everyone knows that we have a unicameral in the state of Nebraska. This makes us unique amongst all other state legislatures, which is great because we love opportunities to feel special. But we're unique because we have this unicameral. We only have one house of government composed of 49 state senators, as opposed to, say, every other state, which has a House and a Senate. It's also important for us as citizens and advocates to understand the unicameral and how it works, because it's going to help us navigate this process. Senators, because we only have a unicameral, they don't officially caucus with their parties or as like ideological groups or interest groups. And for you as a citizen, you don't have to track bills as they move between separate houses of government. We are also unique because the Nebraska legislature is an officially nonpartisan body. Now, I know everyone's like, nonpartisan, Erin, seriously? And I get that. I really do feel that. But officially on paper, we are a nonpartisan body. And this means that you are not going to see a D or an R behind any state senator names when you're tuned in to Nebraska Public Television watching the legislature. Um, and it also should mean, and has meant in the past, that senators should not be making policy decisions based on the will of their respective parties, but rather should be working together to find policy solutions that work for all Nebraskans, regardless of their party. Now, of course, this is what it means in theory, and in practice, as I'm sure you're aware, the Nebraska legislature has in recent years fallen into the same hyperpartisanship that we've seen on the national level. Not always is this the case, and there are occasionally rare glimpses of that nonpartisan spirit, which is a beautiful thing to witness. And it's useful for you as a citizen to know about this not officially nonpartisan spirit of the legislature, because you can use that when you advocate. Now, what all of this means for you as a citizen and as an advocate is that you really do have more access to the legislative process than you would in another state. So if you're looking for reasons to stay in Nebraska, because it's not the property taxes, that's a joke, send your reactions. Um, Access to the legislative process and the unicameral are great reasons for that. You are the second house, and that gives you power. Practically speaking, there are fewer senators for you to know and talk to. The legislative process and how a bill becomes a law is a relatively straightforward process on paper. And we have the added benefit here in Nebraska that every single bill introduced in the legislature is required to have a public hearing, which means that you as a citizen get to have input, if you wanted to, on every single idea presented as a legislative bill during the session. So if you've got strong opinions about sales tax on twine, you get to go to a public hearing, but twine is not what we're here to talk about. It's also important for us to know that we've just been through an election year. You may have noticed that happening. Every 2 years, we get the opportunity as citizens to create an entirely new legislature because half of the senators in the legislature are up for either election or re-election. And remember that we also have term limits in Nebraska. So every senator is only allowed to serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms. They can come back after they've served those 2 terms, and that's happened before. And we have a few who are doing that now. But we do have term limits, which makes it difficult for senators to learn the process. But it also means that once you learn the process, you have more power as a citizen and an advocate. In 2024, all of the odd numbered districts were up for election or re-election. And those 2024 elections gave us 17 new senators out of the 49. Contentious bills need to overcome a filibuster with 33 votes. That's the current rule, which means that to stop a contentious and harmful bill, at least 17 senators would need to vote against that bill in what is known as cloture. In the past few legislative sessions, there have been some really bad bills that have not passed by just 1 or 2 votes. And sometimes those votes cross party lines. Now, this shows the spirit of our nonpartisan legislature, while maybe on its last breath, still currently alive. And it also shows the power of citizens and advocates to reach their state senators and sway a vote and stop bad bills or help advance good ones. Now, I know that the numbers of the current legislature and the makeup of this upcoming legislature might make folks a little nervous, but I am telling you that we can still defeat bad legislation, and we'll get to how we do that a little bit later in this presentation. Okay, the 2025 legislative session. This new legislature will be the 109th legislature, and it will meet over the course of 2 sessions in what is known as the biennium. The first session, this one in 2025, is the 90-day long session, and the second session in 2026 will be the short session. The first session of this biennium will start on Wednesday, January 8th, and it will last for 90 legislative days, not calendar days, not your normal course of events, but 90 legislative days, which means that we are tentatively ending this session on June 18th. So when we say it's a long session, it's not just in terms of calendar of what that looks like, but also be prepared for that to be 90 legislative days of emotionally draining, long feelings, that kind of thing. We call this the long session, and it is a long session because the legislature has to accomplish quite a bit right away, in addition to the regular business of any legislative session. They're going to have to elect a speaker. They're going to have to elect committee chairs. Both of those are currently done by secret ballot, once again to uphold that nonpartisan spirit of the legislature. Senators will also have to be placed on their respective subject matter committees. Additionally, the legislature has to adopt its own rules, which is always a fun time, and they have to pass a budget. So when we're looking at the calendar, what is this session going to look like? As with any session, all legislative bills will be introduced in the first 10 days of the legislative session. So by January 23rd, we are going to know all of what's coming when it comes to bills and what they contain. In years past, senators have been able to bring as many bills as they wanted, which could get a little unruly. However, there is a new rule this session of a 20 bill limit per senator. Some senators are already planning to hit this limit, while others will still only bring a handful, or last session we saw a senator just bring one bill. But theoretically, if every senator brings 20 bills, we are going to have up to 980 bills introduced in those first 10 days. What this means for you as an advocate as we move forward through the sessions is that senators are going to start being more selective about what bills they're going to bring and what interests they're going to represent through those bills. It will also likely mean that we are going to see bigger bills that include more topics and like pieces of legislation, and probably some more large packages of bills as the session progresses. Also, at the start of session, we will see the speaker election and the election of committee chairs. Like I said, these elections are done by secret ballot. Although we do see rules introduced every session to get rid of the secret ballot, which would undermine that nonpartisan spirit and encourage more partisanship in this process. The Speaker of the Legislature is important for you as an advocate to know about, because this senator controls the ultimate schedule of the legislature, and in a lot of cases, the tenor and the temperature of the legislative session, which is what we saw in 2023. The speaker will also control when bills will be scheduled for debate. So whether bills, are held back and don't have time for debate, or whether we're fast tracking bills through the process. The speaker will also determine when public hearings are going to happen in the legislative session, although we would anticipate that those hearings will start towards the end of January and will likely happen all through February and March. The speaker is also largely in control of procedural issues during debate, which is a power that can and has been used to silence the minority or curtail their power, which means as well that your voices and interests as a citizen are also curtailed in that process, since those senators represent you. When we're looking at committees, we want committees to be balanced because of that spirit of nonpartisanship, and because there is more thoughtful debate in those committees about any piece of legislation and whether or not it is actually well written, if it makes any actual sense as a policy and can be implemented, and also if it will help and not harm Nebraskans. We're going to be watching committee makeup closely, because in the last few years, we have already seen more partisanship in committee makeup, which means that harmful legislation can be more easily fast-tracked through those committees and onto the floor for general debate. We're also paying attention to committee chair elections. Those are important because they control the public hearing schedule in their respective committees. They also will determine what public hearings look like and how citizens can interact in those committees. And if you were around for the last couple sessions, you know that this can be incredibly frustrating. So those committee chairs will dictate what public hearings look like. They will also determine when the committee will vote on whether or not to advance bills out of committee. So when public hearings start getting scheduled, we will start to get a better sense of what are each committee's priorities based on when they're scheduling bills and how quickly they're voting on bills to move out of committee. Okay. This is a lot of information, so I appreciate you all sticking with me. The other thing that the legislature has to do in this long session is pass a budget. Um, this year, the budget fight is going to be contentious, to say the very least. We no longer have the COVID era relief funds to play with as a state, and do fun things like funding a private lake in Ashland or a canal to steal water from Colorado or to build a brand new prison. And without that money, as well as a bunch of other chickens coming home to roost, we don't have extra funding to do big, bold things. But we also don't have money anymore to fund the things that we were doing. In fact, we have a projected $400 million less than we have in years past to spend as a state. What this means, not only for the Women's Fund, but probably for a lot of your interests generally, is that we are going to see massive cuts in basically every part of government, particularly when it comes to services and programs for low income folks. So while the budget might not be a place that you usually see the Women's Fund, this year it will be of incredible importance so that we don't lose ground on the gains that we've made, particularly in the areas of economic security. As we know, economic security and instability have a disparate impact on women, and economic insecurity impedes our work towards gender equity. So when we do things like reduce access to SNAP or childcare, when we make it harder to access those important programs that support Nebraskans in times of need, we make it harder for women to achieve economic security. So we will be keeping a close eye on any cuts to critical programs, particularly in the Department of Health and Human Services. For you as advocates, make sure you're plugged in with us and other advocacy groups who keep tabs on the issues that are impacting you, your family, and your communities so that you know what's needed and what to prepare for when it comes to the budget fight. It's an incredibly complicated fight. It's an incredibly complicated piece of legislation. Making sure that you're connected to groups who are doing all the combing through for you is going to be really important. All right, how a bill becomes a law, and I forgot my Schoolhouse Rock costume, so we'll just have to imagine it, that I'm a bill sitting on the steps of the Capitol. So how a bill becomes a law. Although the makeup of the legislature and of committees and maybe even some of the rules will change in 2025, the process of a bill becoming a law will remain the same. Like I said, bills are going to be introduced in those first 10 days of session and then referred to their appropriate subject matter committee. Remember that every bill gets a public hearing, and the overarching schedule of when public hearings occur will be set by the speaker. Committee chairs will then schedule their committee's bills for public hearing, and you as citizens are supposed to get 7 days notice for any public hearing. And we will let you know when the bills that we're watching are scheduled for those public hearings. There are two main ways to participate in the public hearings. In person at the hearing itself, and they make this super easy for ordinary citizens to do who have lives and jobs and children by scheduling them in Lincoln either at 9 a.m. or 1:30 p.m. in fairly claustrophobic hearing rooms, where you just sit and don't really know the schedule. But we'll do our best to keep you posted on when that's happening. There's also the easier version of online comments. Once a bill has its public hearing, the committee then controls what happens to it. It is up to the chair of the committee to decide when the bill will be discussed in an executive session. So let's say you missed the public hearing and the deadline for online comments, but that bill is still in committee. you're going to the committee to ask them to do whatever you want for them to do on a bill. So you haven't missed your opportunity. If you miss a public hearing, you just have to email the committee and hope that someone in their office reads it, but I can tell you they do. The whole committee in that executive session then decides whether to end the bill's progress, take no action, or advance it to the full legislature, where it will then be scheduled for debate by the speaker. And that vote only requires a majority vote of the members in any committee. If a bill is advanced to the full legislature, it goes through 3 rounds of debate, and each round has its own rules. So because any insular group like a legislature or something like that likes to have fancy words to make it feel exclusive, we didn't call it first, second, or third round of debate. The first round of debate is called general file. The second round of debate is called select file, and the third round of debate is called final reading. If it passes final reading, it goes to the governor's desk, and he has several actions that he can take as well. In past sessions, general file debate has been allowed for up to 8 hours. Now, that doesn't mean that every bill needs to be debated for 8 hours. If we're talking about like a minor change, let's go back to that twine example, might not take 8 hours. But bills that we are typically working on will take a more extended period of time, and that can last up to 8 hours. Select file debate can last up to 4 hours, and final reading debate has in the past lasted for up to 2 hours. But this timing will be reset. It'll either be the same or they'll change it in the 2025 session. If you've ever just randomly tuned into the Nebraska legislature because you're like the rest of us and have very normal hobbies where you're watching the legislature during the day, then you have probably tuned in at a certain point where there's just someone standing up at a podium, like reading in a monotone super fast, and you can't make out anything they're saying. That's what final reading sounds like. Just a hot tip. Okay, I'm going to pause it right there and see if anybody has questions at this point.
There is one in the chat, Erin.
Can you read it to me?
I sure can. From Anonymous. What are you seeing at the federal level that will influence local policy, or do we even know enough yet to anticipate some of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that on the federal level, I don't know that we know enough specifically and know what that's going to look like. We are worried about things like conversations happening around Medicaid and turning that into a block grant, which would impact the way that we run Medicaid here in the state. For example, on issues regarding gender equity, we really just don't know. But here's what I would tell you. Given the uncertainty and chaos at the federal level, we have a real opportunity at the state level and more local levels to be able to stop what we would anticipate are the bad things, as much as we can from the federal level. So the state legislature and your city councils and your school boards and that kind of stuff might actually feel more accessible and more within your control as a citizen and an advocate than whatever's happening in DC. I will also note if there, since I do give a lot of information, and I will also note that one of the great joys in my job is being able to answer questions about process and about bills and about how the legislature works and government works. So you're always welcome to reach out to me at any time with questions. You're going to think you're bothering me, but you're not. I'm telling you right now that it gives me great joy. So please feel free to reach out with any questions after this as well. So, what is on our radar? Given all of what I've just shared, as well as the reality of a federal government in chaos, to say the least, and what the governor has signaled as his top priorities this legislative session. We are anticipating playing a lot of defense in this upcoming session, not only on maintaining access to essential services in the budget, but also against an onslaught of harmful and discriminatory legislation that's going to set back our work by years, if not decades, maybe a century. So we know that Senator Kauth is planning to bring back the bill which would ban trans youth from sports and bathrooms. We have also heard that she would like this to include a more far-reaching ban, which includes college-level athletics and perhaps even public accommodations. As early as this morning, no one has seen a draft of what these pieces of legislation would look like, but we do know that those topics are coming back. We also know that she is planning to introduce a legislative version of Governor Pillen's absolutely pointless so-called Women's Bill of Rights, which seeks to define what a woman is in state statute, which precisely nobody has asked for ever. Anyway, while this is framed as protecting women, protecting women's and girls' sports, we know better. And we would directly call out this hateful measure for what it actually is, which is a discriminatory attempt to target an already marginalized group rather than to actually promote equity and safety in school, in sports, everywhere for women and girls. We know who is perpetuating gender-based violence in our community, and we can clearly see who and what systems are impeding our progress towards gender equity. It's not defining female bodies in state statute. Tell you what. Additionally, ballot initiative 434 passed in our most recent election, which enshrined the current 12-week abortion ban into the state constitution. What I don't think folks realize is that this also left it open for the legislature to enact further, more extreme restrictions on abortion. While it would absolutely be the right move to leave abortion alone for at least one session, I don't want us resting on our laurels, not even laurels, actually. I don't want us thinking that it's not coming up. And I think it's a good idea to be prepared for one of the more radical anti-abortion senators to introduce a more restrictive ban. I think it's also safe to stay ready for legislation restricting access to medication abortion and contraception, given the national conversation and the desire of anti-abortion groups to target these medications and further erode our rights to bodily autonomy. We have not heard or seen any drafts of legislation doing this, but again, we need to stay ready and we need to stay prepared. So this feels like a lot of defense because that's just the reality of the moment, unfortunately. We have stopped these harmful bills before, and we can and we will stop them again. We did it last session when they seemed to have a filibuster-proof vote card, just like it seems they do now. And that's why we learn about this process. That's why we know who our senators are. And that's why we make sure you're informed about what's coming and how to engage, because that's how we win. And that's how we advance gender equity for all Nebraskans. So in that spirit, here's just a little of what we're fighting for this session. In reproductive health and our freedom from violence programs, we are bringing back the Sexual Assault Emergency Care Act, which requires hospitals to provide accurate information about and access to emergency contraception for sexual assault survivors when they come in for care. Also, in freedom from violence, we are working to increase survivor representation in programs that assist survivors, like the Crime Victims Reparations Program, which is a little known program under the Crime Commission that we've been slowly reforming over the years to better serve survivors. We are also planning to address the housing related needs of survivors through providing housing related financial assistance and updating landlord tenant laws to ensure that survivors and their families can not only find homes, but be safe in their homes. In economic security, we will be supporting our partners in critical efforts to extend the income eligibility expansion of SNAP and child care subsidies. I don't know if everyone knows this because some of our senators don't, but people need food to survive. And one crucial way that people get food in the state of Nebraska is through the SNAP program. For both SNAP and childcare, we expanded the eligibility income limits during COVID to allow more people into the program. And those eligibility limits are set to expire in 2026, which means that Nebraska families will have a harder time feeding themselves and their kids. And we will set back gender equity by further exacerbating the unequal caregiving burden placed on women in this state by restricting access to child care subsidies. Also in economic security, we are going to continue to push for housing justice reforms by balancing the scales in our landlord tenant laws, because we know that the consequences of housing instability and evictions disproportionately impact women and their families in this state. I'm going to take a breath and take an awkward sip of water while my colleague reads me any questions that might be up at this point.
Yes, as you sip, two questions. Do we know if the sports and spaces bill will focus on all trans youth or just trans girls in sports?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I do, because no one has seen a draft yet. I do know that that introducing senator has made this her priority and has been trying to have those conversations to find out what's workable. Now, obviously, none of it is workable for us, and none of it is workable for like existing as a human being with some sense of shared humanity. But I would anticipate that it's banning all trans youth, but it could be that we see a different version. It's just hard to say because no one has seen a version yet. But we know like model legislation at from the national playbook is all trans youth, and I would anticipate that she's looking to cover the rest with that women's Bill of Rights.
And you had just mentioned, Erin, that we haven't seen a draft yet, but a follow-up question is about like club sports as well. Do you think that could be included in that bill?
I don't think that the state legislature has the ability to regulate club sports. I mean, I think anything's on the table at this point, but it would surely be challenged if they were trying to regulate sports like that, club sports like that. But
yeah,
who knows? Who knows?
Can you clarify the definition under defense? You have content bans.
Oh yeah.
Attacks on public education.
Sure thing. So in the past two sessions, we have seen banning DEI, which the universities have gone ahead and tried to do themselves. We've also seen book bans and content bans, saying that some content is pornographic or and then using that to limit what information students have access to. Now, for us at the Women's Fund, and also just personally for me as a parent, this is a huge problem, obviously. particularly around our efforts for comprehensive sex education, which we know just protects children. So we would anticipate that kind of, against sex ed, and we would also, I would anticipate content bans around LGBTQ plus material being classified under those as well.
Another request to talk more about housing related options.
Sure. So we have been working on housing justice here at the Women's Fund since 2022, I want to say. And we know that housing instability and evictions disproportionately impact women. So, for instance, Douglas County here in Nebraska handles about 50% of statewide evictions on an annual basis. And about 60% of people coming through eviction court are single moms or women. So it's an issue of critical importance. It intersects with a lot of our work on just general gender equity, economic security, also freedom from violence. Housing is one of the primary concerns when we talk to survivors. So we're always working on balancing the scales to put in tenant protections, make it easier for tenants to stay in their homes and not be so easily evicted. In terms of freedom from violence, we put out a survey to organizations that serve survivors, and housing related financial assistance was perhaps the top concern for those organizations. And the consequences of not having access to housing related financial assistance for survivors in particular are incredibly dire. So we're working really hard on trying to create a fund for housing assistance specifically for survivors of domestic violence and trafficking, and making that sustainable into the future. I'm happy to answer any more questions on that after this as well. You can always feel free to follow up with me on email.
There's more of a comment about SNAP in the chat to us, just about there's two income eligibility limits, gross and net, and needing to get stats maybe to see how many people were helped and who, and then needing to drop the drug felony penalty that's connected to that.
Yes, we absolutely need to address the drug felony ban that I believe is coming up this session as well. So we'll be working on that. In terms of getting more information about numbers, I would encourage you to go over to Nebraska Appleseed, who do just incredible work and have for years around the SNAP program.
Okay, one more question in the chat right now. Do we know more about where the budget cuts in HHS, Health and Human Services, and Medicaid will focus?
Yeah, we know that there will be, they've proposed, I believe, cutting staff positions, like a lot of staff positions, which is a problem because call wait times, like as you're trying to sort through programs, are getting longer and longer and longer, which means that people have less access to those programs, and cutting staff isn't going to make that problem any easier. I'm happy to chat, like to talk with folks over email as well and direct them like where in the budget request we're going to see that. But we do know that they're going to come after Medicaid in the ways that they can. We know that they're coming after like early childhood education and a couple other pieces. So I'm happy to, I don't have the link on me right now, but I am happy to follow up with anybody who's interested in that over email. I'm sorry, I don't know more specifics right off the top of my head.
That's all the questions right now.
Great. That means I'm crushing it. Reactions appreciated. So what can we do? Be ready on day one. First and foremost, If you do not know who your senator is, don't feel bad about that. That's okay. Welcome to the party. We're really glad to have you here. If you don't know who your senator is, you do need to find that out. And I know we're going to drop a link in the chat. Super easy. Feel free to share that link with your networks as well. If folks don't know, keep it handy, keep it bookmarked. You're at a party and someone's like, I don't know who my senator is. You're ready to go. Pull that thing up. At least that's what I do because I'm fun at parties. Additionally, you're going to need to make a list of 5 people in your network. Maybe you want to make a list of even more who could get engaged, who want to get engaged, who have expertise or experience that would be useful in the for the legislature to know. Find their senators, help them find their senators, and make sure they have the information that they need to engage throughout the session as well. And I got to tell you, as someone who spends a lot of time in the lobby trying to find ins with senators who might not otherwise talk to me, there's a huge benefit to like thinking through, oh, my cousin grew up in that town, so I have a connection, or like I visited once and there was this really cute store or something like that. Anything to get a conversation started with the senator to find that in is great and useful. So we also need you to start talking to your senator now, even your senator elects, if that's the situation you're in. Send an email, introduce yourself before the session, and let them know what you value as a constituent and what you would like them to focus on. Maybe you're having problems with childcare right now, and that's what you would like your senator to think about as they approach session. Maybe you've got a kid in school, in public schools, and they're having an issue, or you'd like to see this happen in public. So that's another way that you can start a conversation with the senator and start developing that relationship. Let them know what you value. All of the above are going to help you start that conversation with them. You do not need to be an expert on every bill. You don't need to be an expert on every issue. You don't even need to know like which specific area of statute you're trying to address or talk about. All you need is your own experience as a Nebraskan and as a member of your various communities, as a member of your family. Tell those senators what matters to you. Tell them what you'd like them to focus on. Offer to be a resource. You want them to think of you when a particular issue comes up as they're thinking through it or considering how to vote. So, oh, I've got this issue that I don't really know a lot about, but I do have a constituent that emailed me about this problem. I'd like to reach out to them. Like, that's the ideal of where you want to be as a citizen and advocate. Now, will that always happen? No. Are there senators who are better than others at reaching out to constituents and asking questions and being curious? Yes, absolutely. But you're never going to know that unless you try to reach out to them at the beginning. Now, if you're thinking right now, but Aaron, I have talked to my senator and they don't care and they aren't listening, I would suggest finding a senator who is listening and who does care about your issues, and let them know your experience with your own senator. Ask them to help you get your voice heard. Ask them to help you navigate the process around an issue that matters to you. Take the time now as well, as you're entering the holiday season. Maybe you're just like in the car at the parking lot at the mall waiting for Santa pictures or something like that. Start getting connected to organizations working on the issues that you care about and who can help you navigate the legislative process for bills that interest you. Now, while I'm absolutely flattered that you're here with us to work with on gender equity, I also know that everybody's got a lot of issues that they care about, and you might not find those issues at the Women's Fund, which is fine. We all can't do everything. I've had very smart people tell me that we can't do everything. So there is an organization out there that cares about the other issues that you care about, and getting connected to them is going to be super helpful. But it does also include the Women's Fund. Please stick with us and be connected. Additionally, get some rest, breathe, hydrate, and
Aaron,
get ready.
there's one question
Wait.
before you final.
Well, I would also just say that the last thing to do is make sure that you want, if you're interested in how do I rest, how do I care, I'm so anxious, whatever. We had a power hour focused on community care with two really excellent human beings that you can also revisit when you're feeling that way. And now I'm ready for a question.
Sorry, I'll find that link in a second too and share it. Kind of the inverse of if your senator never listens to you, if your senator is supportive of the issues that you're into as well, how important is it for folks to stay engaged with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You should always be talking to senators, whether or not they agree with you or not. So if you do have a supportive senator, and I do, so I get it. Even when I get those action alerts and I have a very supportive senator that tell me to contact my senator, I always do it. And the reason I do it is because I know that senators who are supportive of your issues use those contacts, use the stories you're sharing. They keep track. They're like, I had this many citizens reach out to me asking me about this issue and to take this stance. And that's really helpful for them to point out, that, like, let's say we're facing the sports and spaces bill again. They're going to be able to go out onto the floor to have conversations with their fellow senators and say things like, 800 people contacted me telling me to oppose this, and I only got 3 emails from someone outside my district asking me to support it. Right. Um, Now, I know that I said at the top that we've become more partisan in recent years, but I will say that there are a lot of times and a lot of conversations that I've had with senators when it's just us one on one, where they've pointed out that they haven't heard anything about this topic or they've heard a lot on one side of the issue. And that does help sway their opinion. And it certainly gives them something to think about. So, your supportive senators aren't going to be annoyed by you emailing them or calling their office to ask them to do such and such thing. And quite honestly, it once again just establishes you as like an engaged citizen and someone who cares about the issues, and so for that reason maybe also a resource. So I would encourage you to reach out to your senator no matter if they're supportive or not, because they can always find a way to use that information in a useful way to further advance your interests. All right. Well, that's really all that I have. If any of you know me, I could talk about this for maybe a few days. So, like I said, if you have questions after this, you're thinking about it, or you have questions as the session moves, or even as we roll into session, please, please, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I love answering these types of questions. I love helping all of you navigate this process. So please reach out to me if you do have any questions. And let's be ready on January 8th. I'll see you there.